Hi everyone, thank you for having me. I'm actually looking forward to your comments because this is the beginning of our project and part of our larger research agenda. So I'm going to start with a brief introduction because probably this topic deserves a few words of introduction. It's not the most widely studied one. I'm going to then present my theoretical framework briefly and some empirical analysis, and then bring some conclusion that hopefully connect a little bit better the project with the topic that we are discussing today. So first of all, I start with a definition. So what I define as blank null voters and votes are non-conventional votes that consist of voluntarily, and this is an important word, voluntarily deciding of either nullifying the ballot, so either like making some like drawing face or writing something on the ballot, making it voluntarily invalid. And I brought here some like an example that was actually kind of interesting and was found on an anonymous ballot in 1881 in a French election that said, bad word, which I didn't put here, to all the deputies, none of them are worth one good pig, however dirty it is. It will do a better job than those damn animals. Another part of my definition instead is those people that voluntarily, again, leave it completely blank. So they go to vote, but they leave the ballot completely blank. And here I report instead a much more recent example of someone that declared on the BBC blog after the Greek election of 2012 that they cast a blank vote. I stood in the booth, went through all the ballot papers a few times, and just could not bring myself to vote for any of them. And finally, the last group is always still in this category is instead the institutionalized option. So in some country, you actually have the option to pick the blank vote as a ballot option. There is in Nevada, in the state of Nevada, Ukraine, India actually just passed the law. So it's actually quite more common than what you think. So another big question that usually I ask is why should we care? And the reason why people usually ask this question is because at the national level, at aggregate level, this is a minor, it appears to be a minor magnitude. But what I claim instead is that this minor magnitude actually is masking interesting variation. And we have interesting variation at the regional level. So if you look inside the country and you start looking at smaller unit of analysis, like provinces in this case, you actually notice that across provinces there is a significant variation. So here we have, sorry, am I covering it actually? So here there is I brought Spain and Italy as an example. So these are like all the provinces, and I collapse the election of the lower house from 1899, and this is as a proportion of the electorate. So eligible voters, not of the vote. And the same you can see for Italy also, huge variation across provinces. So this is a puzzling variation of this behavior. And secondly, another interesting is the time trend. So this national level actually masks interesting increase. So here I'm using the IDEA International data set, and I'm using as a point of reference, starting point, the 1975 level. And so just to simplify the observation, you can see that across the time, and this is true across country and across different institutional settings, the phenomena has actually doubled. Now, there is a little bit of previous literature. There's not much work done. The majority of the work is done at the macro level, which I think is a little bit of a problem, and they often deal with this phenomenon quite in isolation. They don't compare it with other voting behavior or other protest behavior. So what I'm trying to do is provide you with a comprehensive framework that is alternative and also to a different approach. That I'm proposing an individual level or municipal level, anyway micro as possible level of analysis. So let's briefly, my theoretical framework starts by organizing this phenomena across two dimensions. Like we love the 2x2 tables in political science, so I tried that too. And so these are the two dimensions I'm focusing on. One is the political dimension, so whether this phenomenon is actually mobilized. Is it coordinated? Is it someone pushing for that type of behavior? Or if it's somehow like more spontaneous or not clearly mobilized. And the other is the institutional, you're all probably thinking about that right now. It's like whether the institutions are constraining in terms of how they influence the voting behavior, or they're not. And so you're probably all thinking about compulsory versus non-compulsory voting right now, and that's exactly what I'm going to talk about. So, however, I'm going to start from this like small box in the bottom, which is like the smallest in terms of magnitude, but it's kind of like the most unique and like purest form of this phenomenon in some sense. So what does this like box represent? So here is what I found, what I call the pure protest voters. So these are people that voluntarily decide to go to vote even if they don't have to. They're not mobilized and they decide to leave it blank or nullify the ballot. And they're contrary to what much of the literature think, I'm actually claiming they're informed and rational. Rational in the sense that they want to express a message clearly and specifically with that behavior. So they're expressive voter, and there is a literature about that. We can talk more in the Q&A if you want. And they're sending this conscious political message. I'm claiming they have a high political sophistication, and the reason is because I think that this is not a conventional method when not mobilized. And hence it requires some sophistication to envision the protest through the ballot. Until this framework, we can say that, like, basically, if it's not mobilized, it's not part of the common repertoire of protest that a country has. And finally, of course, as you're all thinking, they are highly discontent. Now, this other dimension I'm going to show you instead is when it's mobilized. So what happened when actually someone proposed this vote as a method of protest, and there are actually many cases. And when I'm claiming that you then observe a larger phenomenon in terms of magnitude, but on average, what any individual needs less information to propose and think about this method. And so we will see how this is like relatively less informed but larger phenomenon. And we've seen very famous cases of this. Argentina with Perón is a quite famous case, but even more recently, Thailand in 2006 witnessed a lot of this, and we'll talk more about that. And finally, the last case I'm showing you is instead in compulsory system. So I'm looking at constrained institution, that is the term I choose, but I can change if you don't like it, and those that are not mobilized, so relatively spontaneous type. In this case, you obviously observe a much larger phenomenon. But it's a more confused, let's say, phenomenon in terms of its characteristic. In the sense, it's a less informed type. You can imagine that in a compulsory system, a lot of potential abstentionists, people that might not care, they show up, they don't know what to vote, and they leave it blank. And so in that case, what I describe is a phenomenon as a less resolute-like phenomenon, and not just in terms mathematically because there are more potential abstentionists in the group, but also because probably those people that want to send a signal, they realize how much more ambiguous the signal is in this context, and they might choose other methods of protest. So empirically, I'm going to show you two of this comparison. I'm going to start from like the feature between compulsory and non-compulsory type of phenomenon, and the other is between mobilized and non-mobilized BNP. So starting with this, I've been trying to work on with this large cross-national survey that you probably all know. It's at the individual level. And what I do, I run a regression by considering, first of all, controlling for obvious country-level characteristic and election characteristic. And so within these countries and with this election characteristic, I also control for individual level characteristic. You know, everything that you might think will prompt people to vote in this manner. And what I also focus on is actually in the comparison. And here we go back to the idea that this phenomenon should not be isolated from the other type of behavior. And so here, when I compare the blank voters, and I call it BNB, you probably got it, and from the valid voters, which are anyone that pick a valid party or candidate, I see that the main drive of the difference is actually the level of discontent. What interesting, the main driving difference between this group and the abstention is actually the high level of information of the former compared to the latter. But interesting, this is true only in non-compulsory system. When you study the countries that have compulsory system, this feature changes. And the story is very different. You get a less educated, on average, voter that pick this choice, a much less discontent compared to the other groups. And also, I don't mention it here, but much more anti-democratic in the sense they don't express a strong support of democracy as they do in compulsory system. The other interesting case, and I'm also going to the feature here that a little bit more in detail, is the mobilized versus unprompt type. I use here the case of Spain, and it probably doesn't need a lot of explanation. You can clearly notice a big change in 2004 of the use of blank null voting. So this was explained by the fact that in 2002, a nationalist party, Batasuna, was banned. It was banned because it was accused to be connected to the terrorist group of ETA, and following also 9/11, Spain decided to support a little bit more the fight against local terrorism too, and so they moved to ban this party. So 2004 was the first lower Laos election where the Batasuna was not running anymore. And here I'm focusing on the País Vasco, which is the region that, where this party has a strong record. So first of all, I wanted to show you that this is actually what's happening, because it's not so clear that there was actually only the mobilization, yes, driving this phenomenon. So I'm leveraging here the pre and post ban, and combine this with the nice variation across municipality of amount of support, potential support that this party had. I use for this, what you see there, the euskera little proportion. So euskera is the language of the País Vasco, and the proportion of literate people that actually are speaking and writing in this language, it was used as a proxy of potential support for this party. So exploring this variation, I was able to identify the causal impact of the ban. I also, if you're interested, I also control for various municipality fixed effect, and I also take care of various pre-trends by controlling to specific municipality trends. So as you can see, there is a strong impact. I reported this for it should be easier to see, but it's strong and significant, meaning that where this party has a larger potential support, the ban systematically produces a larger blank null vote. Now, interesting, this year is significantly different. So to then get to my point, I compare different years, for different years, the same specification. So what I do here is that I run a simple specification with various socioeconomic variables, some population side, and education. And this is the proportion of people in each municipality with higher degrees. So what I do is that what I notice and what I want to show is that the 2004, which was the year of mobilization that I proved to be causally valid, is the only one where there was a significant difference in the relationship between education and blank null voting. So if you remember the previous nice peak and the other, you should consider that basically 96 and 2000 and 2008 were the years where there was some kind of endemic lower level type of blank voting, while the 2004 was the big peak. And so in those years, the endemic spontaneous type of voting, you see a strong correlation, positive correlation between municipality with a high level of education and this type of behavior. In 2004, there is the switch. There is the year in which the mobilization enters and plays a role. Now, interestingly, actually, if you run the same previous, the one I show you with the interaction with the Euskera literate, if you run the same specification with illiterate Euskera speaker, which I take as a proxy of let's say, less educated potential supporter of the party, you actually do not get that. So what my conclusion about this is that this behavior in under-mobilization becomes a less informed on average behavior, although still more sophisticated and poor abstention. And as you can see as a control, I run here the same specification with abstention as a proportion of the electorate, and you can see what you probably will expect, that there is a negative correlation between this behavior and the small municipality level of education. Now, some conclusion, because I think I'm running out of time. First of all, I hope I convince you at least partially that even in the smallest, and especially in the smallest phenomenon, and when it's unprompted and unmobilized, this phenomenon is an informed type of protest run by discontent group of voters. And this is actually useful for us because it could be a source of information. It could be a source of information. In fact, it could actually be capturing an early wave of discontent. And they did some preliminary analysis on this. Could be true that is capturing some future possible larger discontent. And in this first preliminary analysis, I'm looking at two things. One is predicting a future abstention, and one is predicting or explaining some kind of more stronger grip of populist party in a country. So this is super preliminary, so it's just for the sake of saying, is there something there? And this is the case of five-star movement. We've been talking a lot about this movement in these days, but what I'm looking at, I took the region, the Italian region, where in 2010, the party decided to run. So there were only a few, half of the region, the Italian region, had this party entering the competition, the other didn't. So the idea was to just check if there was some hint of a change, a different change between 2005 and 2010. So how did this phenomenon change in those regions where the party entered compared to the region where the party didn't enter? Now, what I found in this preliminary small sample type analysis, that it could be something in the sense that in the regions where the party ran, the difference between 2005 and 2010 is actually a decrease, and a significant decrease. And the regions where that wasn't true, it was a smaller and not significant decrease. Even considering that the lower regions started from a higher level of already of blank voting. So this is just to say that there is a hint of the fact that this could be, yes, I'm at the conclusions. There could be something about like this blank vote and future populist party support. And the other instead is the amount of predictive power that previous waves of blank voting have on a future abstention. So if like in a simple correlation with lagged blank null voters, you can see that previous years, the 2 years before, if there was a peak or if there was an increase, you can observe also some like higher future abstentions. So this is obviously needs more investigation, but this can like hint to something there in some kind of predictive power of this phenomenon. And finally, this project entering this debate is actually now quite alive in the US, but also in other countries. Last week, 2 weeks ago, India passed a law that included the blank option on the ballot. Other countries already have it. This is Colombia, this is Russia, that had it until 2006. So the last one is against all option. And this is actually the state of Nevada. There's none of this candidate option on the ballot. And so there is a debate about the fact that whether or not it's a right of the individual to vote blank and be recorded as such. And I think in light of the crisis and the political crisis, this is a very important question, whether or not in face of everyone hating all the parties running, there should be an option recorded as I don't like anyone. And my project also suggests there could be something interesting in there also. If these are relatively informed voters, maybe collecting their opinion in a less ambiguous way could be useful for the governance itself. So thank you, and if you have any questions, here.
Thank you.